Well, welcome everybody to Satsang, February 19th, 2026. And today we're going to do Satsang, and we're doing something a little different today. Usually I line up a chapter out of I Am That, and then I line up a chapter out of pointers because I like the way the pointers is a bit more of an advanced version. It was Nisargadatta's later teaching. But today, we're going to work out of pointers alone. And then I've got a little piece that we may chat about at the end if we have time about satsang. Um, but I wanted to, when I got into this chapter, what I really enjoyed about it was the kind of beginning to end that he does. And I think that's a good thing, to roll through. There's some real cool little nuances in it as we go. So for those who have the pointers book, and by the way, if you don't have pointers, all you have to do is let us know. It looks like this, and all you have to do is let us know, and we can send you a PDF copy. We have that, so
Oh, cool.
just put it on the site, out on our page on Facebook, and we'll messenger one over. So so the so tonight we have it's called the Seed of Consciousness, and it's chapter 21 in that, and I do a fair amount of reading out of it, so you won't if you don't have it, it won't be a huge problem. So and I like these are fun. I Am That, is really the translated back and forth, and what you get with Nisargadatta is a little bit of narrative, so which was kind of fun because the story allows you to place yourself in the position of the person who's likely asking the questions. So he said he looked fidgety and agitated, and his movements were jerky, and he was obviously bursting with impatience. This was a middle-aged European, slim, physically very fit. It was his first visit to Maharaj, and his restlessness drew everyone's attention. If you've ever been in a satsang and you have somebody who's bouncing around, you probably all can relate to that. So as Maharaj looked at him, tears suddenly welled up in his eyes. A compassionate glance from Maharaj seemed to compose him a little, and he gave the usual preliminary information about himself in a few words. Um, he said he had been a student of Vedanta for at least 20 years, but his search for truth had proved abortive. He was deeply despondent and disillusioned, and he could not continue the frustrating pursuit any longer. A flash of hope had come to him when he read Maharaj's I Am That, and he knew that he had found the answer. Immediately he had gotten together the minimum amount of cash needed for the journey to India, and he had just arrived in Bombay. And I can tell you this was back in like 1979, so it wasn't a lot to get to Bombay. In a choked voice, he said, "I have now arrived. My search is over." Tears were flowing from his eyes, and he could hardly control himself. So you get the place that he's at. He's been searching, and he's just found what he thinks is, where he can find the answers that have been eluding him thus far.
Hmm.
So Maharaj listened to him gravely and sat still a few minutes with his eyes closed, perhaps to give him time to compose himself. And then he asked him whether he was firmly convinced that he was not the body. Right? There's the beginning. The visitor confirmed that it was quite clear to him that he was not the body, not merely the body, but something else other than the body, as was clearly explained in the book. That something must be the knowledge I am, the sense of being, right? But he added he could not understand what was meant by the suggestion that he should continuously remain with this knowledge I am. What exactly was he supposed to do? Please, sir, he told Maharaj, I am now unbearably tired of words. I have read and heard them in millions and have not gained anything. Give me the substance now, not mere words, and I shall be eternally grateful to you. So this is really an important piece because, as you know, in our Western culture, we have several little myths and assumptions that underlie our communicating to each other, right? One of them is that there's a universality. So if it happened to you, then I can apply it to humanity. That's one of them. We never really ask ourselves, gee, is this is this an experience that isn't universal? And the other thing that we do is that we have an assumption that says, when I hear something, right, when I verbally hear something, then a transmission has occurred. And we don't ask ourselves that. I mean, think about it. You go to college, what do you hear? A bunch of words, you take a test, and you go, oh, a transmission has occurred, right? All the students, Guion students, I'm sure, think that once they've submitted something and received it back, that there's been some transmission that has occurred, and we don't stop and ask ourselves the question, what is it that we really are looking for here, and how does it live? And so often I talk about story, and I say that, telling a story is the first birthright, the first gift of a child, right? You ask a 5-year-old child a question, they're going to tell you a story, right? And you can remember when we were kids and we put blankets up in the bedroom and we would invite the dragons and the fairies and everybody in. Those were real to us, right? That was story included a sense of presence, right? And what happens is over time, our educational system, it basically washes out the sense of presence, perfects everything in a set of words, and then delivers those words. And so what happens is that there's always if you look at it, there's a backing in that needs to be done if you want to, quote unquote, restore the presence. And even when that's done, you're not quite sure you have, right? You do the best that you can to restore the presence to a story, but you're not entirely sure that that's the case. So that's what he's after, and that's why when you listen to him saying, "I don't understand," I've heard a million words. So Maharaj says, very well, you will have the substance now. Of course, I will have to use words to convey them to you. Maharaj then proceeded, if I say reverse and go back to the source of your beginnings, will it make any sense to you? Right? So very carefully asked. Beautiful question. Does that make sense to you when I ask you that question? Go back to your beginnings, reverse the process, right? In reply, the visitor said that his heart intuitively accepted the truth, but he would have to go deeper into the matter. Perfect. Maharaj told him that he must understand the whole position clearly and instantly. And this he could only do if he went to the root of the matter. So, in other words, he's inviting him actually to go back to that sense of a child, right? The story with presence. I am is presence. So, in order to get to I am, when you say I'm going, when Maharaj says, be with the I am, he's talking about being with the presence. That's actually an activity in arising, right? It's not pedagogical, right? It's not just words, and it's not a teaching piece. It's not a revelation given in words, right? Um, he said he must find out how the knowledge I am first appeared. The seed is the thing, said Maharaj. Find out the seed of this beingness, and you will know the seed of the entire universe. All right. Perfect. So now we understand that the sense of being is a seed, right? Maharaj went on, as you know, you have the body, and in the body is prana, or the life force and consciousness, or beingness, or the knowledge I am. All of those are the same thing. Right. So when Ramesh says, you all know that you exist, right, that's what he's talking about. The sense of presence, the sense of beingness, right? Um, Now, this total phenomenon of the human being, is it any different from any of the other creatures, or even the grass that sprouts up from the earth? Think over it deeply. Suppose a little water accumulates in your backyard. After a time, a body of insect forms there. It begins to move, and it knows that it exists. Right? Then again, suppose a piece of stale bread is left in the corner for some days, and a worm makes its appearance in it and begins to move, and it knows that it exists. The egg of a fowl, after hatched for a certain length of time, suddenly breaks open and a little chick appears. It begins to move about, and it knows that it exists. The sperm of man germinated in the womb of a woman after a 9-month period is delivered as a baby. The sperm, developed into the form of a full-grown infant, goes through the states of sleeping and waking, carries out its usual physical functions, and knows that it exists. You know, there's a very famous statement that Maharaj makes, which is that you know you exist and all the rest is interpretation. Right? So that's
Mm.
so so that's the one knowing. I know I exist. He says in all of these cases, the worm, the chicken, the human being, what is it that is really born? What is it that has supervised the process from conception to delivery? Is it not the knowledge I am that has remained latent from conception to delivery and in due course is born? This beingness or consciousness, identical in all four cases, finding itself without any kind of support, right? Mistakenly identifies itself with the particular form it has assumed. So there's the step, right? Now, remember, that's all entirely supported. There's no support for beingness as beingness itself. That all of us are just simply an extrusion of the same beingness, right? There's that's not anything that you're going to find out in kindergarten. At least it wasn't in my kindergarten. But there was a huge emphasis, right, on developing this body mind that they called Alan and the story that Alan was living so that Alan could become whatever it was that the story would be, the performance, the kind of performance stuff that we are all dipped in, from beginning to end. And people tell me, they go, well, I'm not such a performer, and then I see them and I go, okay. Judy comes in and she's got pictures behind. Joseph's got, his stuff. Brad does his, for years has been a musical genius for sure. You know, I can kind of name what everybody produces, so to speak, right? So in a way, we're all built to produce, right? And in a very individuated way. And when we do, we get the credit, and when we fail, we get
The blame.
there you go, the blame, right? So that's the first mistake. In other words, what is really without shape or form, the knowledge I am. Now remember, he uses the word knowledge, and I almost would prefer to use the term sense. To me, knowledge is actually something that is more objective. It's the sense, just the sense of beingness, not being this or being that, right? Not being anything, but just consciousness generally limits itself to only one particular form and thereby accepts its own birth, and thereafter lives in a constant shadow of the terror of death. Thus is born the notion of an individual personality or identity or ego. That's how we ended up believing that we were us. That's the result. So he says, now do you see the source of I amness? It is not dependent on the body for its individual existence. And is not the body merely the germinated sperm which has developed itself? And importantly, is the sperm anything other than the essence of food consumed by the father of the child and the mother of the child? And finally, is not the food something thrown up by the four elements, ether, air, fire, and water, through the medium of a fifth element, the earth? Right. So what we believe to be us is just simply food. Now you can see that, right? You can see that we don't think of ourselves that way particularly because we've individuated ourselves and we have achievements and this and that, and we tell stories when we die and everything. But the bottom line is that we're born, we consume what's in manifestation around us, and then we die, and then that body mind is consumed, right? That's the whole circle. So the what we think we are, the body mind, is really part of the consumption cycle, right? The seed of consciousness is thus traced to nothing but food, and the body is the food of consciousness. And as soon as the body dies, consciousness also disappears. Right? We know that. If you've ever been around a dead body and talked to it, it doesn't talk back. It's really clear, no presence there. He says, and yet consciousness is the seed of the entire universe. Every single individual, whether he dreams, has identical experience of a world created in consciousness. When the person is not quite awake and conscious, I love this little piece I'm going to read to you. It's a lot of fun here. because you can see that we kind of rank our dreams. So he said, when a person is not quite awake and consciousness is just stirring, he dreams. And in his dreams and in that minimal spot of consciousness is created an entire dream world, right? Similar to the real world outside, all in a split second. And in that world are seen the sun and the earth with hills and rivers and buildings and people, including the dreamer himself, behaving exactly like people in the real world. Whilst the dream lasts, the dream world is very real indeed, and the experiences of the people in the dream, including the dreamer himself, appear to be true, tangible, and authentic. Perhaps even more so than those of the real world. But once the dreamer wakes up, the entire dream world with all of its realities that then existed collapses into the consciousness in which it was created. Why? For the new dream to take its place. In the waking state, the world emerges because the seed of ignorance, consciousness, beingness, it takes you into a waking dream state. You dream that you are awake, you dream that you are asleep, and you do not realize you're dreaming because you are still in the dream. All right? Indeed, when you do realize that this is all a dream, you will have already awakened. Only the Jnani knows true waking and true sleep. At this stage, the visitor asked Maharaj if he was asked by Maharaj if he had any questions on what he had heard so far, and he promptly asked. Yeah, this is pretty good. He asked the perfect question. He says, "What is the principle or conceptual mechanism behind the creation of the world?"
Hmm.
Now, remember that when Maharaj talks about what the world is, he always says, that basically it is a device, it is a piece that has been extended. It's an extension, right? It's conceptual. Time and space are conceptual, and within time and space, this concept that consciousness is created happens manifestation. It's indeed conceptual. So Maharaj was pleased that the visitor had correctly used the words conceptual mechanism because he often reminds us that the entire creation of the world is conceptual and that it is most important to remember this fact and not forget it in the midst of all the profusion of words and concepts. Maharaj then continued. He said the original state, the para Brahman, is unconditioned, without attributes, without form, without identity. Indeed, that state, indeed that state is nothing but fullness, not an empty void, but plenum. So it is impossible to give it an adequate name. For the sake of communication, a number of words have been used to indicate that state. That in that original state, prior to any concept, consciousness, the thought I am, spontaneously stirs into existence. How? Why? For no apparent reason, like the gentle wave on a water. Right? So remember that when we're doing this, we in essence are building pieces, right, that are later going to be thrown away, right? But it's a bridge that takes us there, right? So one of the places that, and we've done this before, we've talked about causality. And what we do is we deconstruct and defang causality, right? And when we're done, we see that the world simply arises, right? Nothing causes that to happen. So here he is back at exactly the same point. No cause, no apparent cause, right? Like a gentle wave on the expanse of the water. If you take yourself and you're going to get accustomed to anything as we go through this, right? Start to become accustomed to nothing causes, right? Start to delink that in yourself. No causality, right? It just simply is. And what will begin to happen is as the arising happens, there's no longer a search for why that's the case, which is the perennial search that we've all been on for most of our lives, right? Go to chemistry class. Why did that reaction happen? Go to, pick a class. You can even go into poetry, and most poetry is rendered in cause and effect, right? Those are the pieces of terminology that it uses. Now, I'm sure that there is exceptions to this, and in fact, I suspect that a lot of poets are trying to figure out how not to do that. So let's give them their flowers. But the bottom line is, for the most part, every subject that we engage with, we're looking for the cause that creates the effect, right?
Mm.
He said, he says, the thought, I am, is the seed of sound, the primordial sound, or nada, and at the start of the creation of the universe, it consists of three sounds, A, U, and M, and these three sounds represent the three attributes, sattva, rajas, and tamas, which have also produced three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, also named consciousness, or in English, harmony, activity, and rest. Right. So that's been generated. It is in consciousness that the world has emerged. Indeed, the first thought, I am, has created a sense of duality in the original state of unicity. No creation can take place without the duality of the parenthood principle, male and female. Right. So go to the bottom. It says, but it is truly, an individual may think it is he who acts, but it is truly the essence of the five elements, the prana, the life force, which acts through the particular combination of the three attributes in a particular physical form. Right. So what that makes us is an extrusion. I don't know why I like that word, but that's a great world, right? He says, when the creation of this world is viewed in this perspective, it's easy to understand why the thoughts and actions of one individual, right, which actually is nothing but a psychosomatic apparatus, differ so much in quality and degree from those of millions of others. Why are there Mahatma Gandhis at one end and Hitlers at the other? It is well established fact that the fingerprints of one person are never exactly similar to those to any other person. Leaves of the same tree found different from another in minute details. The reason is that the permutations and combinations of the five elements plus the three attributes in their millions of shades would go into billions and trillions. Let us by all means admire what we think is admirable and love what we think is lovable, but let us understand what it is that we really love and admire, not the conceptual individual, but the wonderful acting ability of consciousness, which is able to play simultaneous millions of roles in this dream play that the world is. So sometimes you get asked the question, they go, I don't understand. You look out at the world, right? And you see some people are in some people like in this particular group are seekers, if you will, if you want to use that term, or spiritual um, followers of some kind, right? And then you can go down the street and there something else is happening, right? Some other belief system, so all of these things, all of the things that you see happening, right? Crime, wickedness, all of those things, right? Religions, all of that is out there happening at the same time, right? Now, if you said, why is that happening? He's kind of already given he's given you that answer, which is don't know, right? But another really kind of a nice thing just to occupy your mind is to say consciousness has the ability to try every possible way
Mm.
to find its way home in this instant. And what you see out there is the attempt by consciousness in all of the variety of ways to do exactly that. So,
One of my
so
favorite, I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
it's
No,
real
go
short.
ahead.
It's real short.
You
One of
go
my
ahead. Go
favorite
ahead.
things that Ramesh said was, God is the infinite one-man show.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, it's exactly. But now again, that's just a filler. In other words, that's a response. It's like when you say, what is the purpose of consciousness? And the answer is to reveal itself to itself, which is the same thing as what Brad just did with shrug his shoulders, right? That's that kind of an answer, right? But but it does help the questioning mind, right? Because when the mind is in, fourth gear rolling down the highway, it's a lot easier than trying to stop the car is to just give it a little bit of grist to work with. And so that's what these commentaries are. And like I say, eventually they'll be thrown over. So he says, he said, in order to avoid being lost in the bewildering diversity of the play of Maya, it is necessary at this stage not to forget the essential unity between the absolute and the relative, between the non-manifest and the manifest. Manifestation comes into existence only with the basic concept, I am. The substratum is noumenon. Okay. Now we could use a different name. That's a very philosophical term, as you all know, and I mention it every time I say it, but the noumenon is the undifferentiated, right? And the phenomenon is the differentiated, as we all know. So that's what the difference is. And the substratum is noumenon, which is total potentiality, right? So in other words, it allows consciousness to pursue every possibility through billions and billions of body minds right now. Um, with the arising of I amness, it mirrors itself into the phenomenal universe, which only appears to be exterior to the noumenon. In order to see itself, the noumenon objectifies itself into phenomenon, and for this objectification to take place, space and time are the necessary concepts. We talked about that before, in which the phenomenon are extended in volume and duration. Phenomenon, therefore, is not something different from noumenon, but it is noumenon itself when objectivized. It's necessary to understand and never to forget this essential identity. Once the concept I am arises, the fundamental unity gets notionally, right? The mind separates it as subject and object in duality, right? That's what happens. And what does that do? Creates a sense of bondage. That's what separation does functionally. So when the impersonal conscious manifests itself and identifies with each physical form, the I notion arises, and this I notion, forgetting that it has no independent entity, right? If it were understood that the undifferentiated was generating the differentiated, there would be an immediate understanding that there's no independent existence of this body mind that we think is independent, right? Because that's how we hold it, right? And forgetting it has no independent entity, it converts its original subjectivity into an object with intentions, wants, and desires, and therefore vulnerable to suffering. This mistaken identity is precisely the bondage from which liberation is to be sought. So when you're working with this, you notice that what we do is we take away, right? There's always taking away, taking away, taking away. Why? Because most of us have spent a lifetime building, right? Building, 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 right? I remember when I was young and I would write a biography and I think, oh my goodness, in fact, when I first had my first company, I was so intent on wanting to have 25 people in my company, right? So one day I wrote a description of the company and I said, there's 25 people in the company. And my administrative help, she was awesome, wrote a little note at the bottom and it said, and that's if you count the 11 plants in the office, right? Because that's how badly I wanted to build that, right? I'm building and, I really wanted it to be. Well, here I am, 72 years old, and I could write biographical notes and probably never quit, right? Because over time, guess what? A lot of things get added, right? And pretty soon there's such a volume of things that are added. There's more people will mention things to you and you go, oh yeah, that's right. So you know how that is. So
Yeah.
so whenever someone's young and they want to become more replete, you can assure them, don't worry, it's going to happen, right? So here he is. And what is liberation? Liberation, enlightenment, or awakening is nothing than understanding profoundly, apperceiving that the seat of all manifestation is impersonal consciousness. Right? Now, here's where we get into a little bit of word issue in my mind, because we always use the term impersonal. Now, if I were to say I talked to Tim the other day and, he's a little impersonal, right? That wouldn't sound particularly warm and fuzzy, would it? right? So we basically, when we use the term impersonal, right, we add this piece to it that it doesn't have any essence or warmth or life or I amness, if you will, right? That the presence isn't there. So don't make that mistake. All impersonal says is that the world is not divided into persons. So it's impersonal. But 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 everything that lives within the personality, so to speak, is available on a wholesale basis. It actually is in one big bathtub. Right. So just recognize, don't get tripped up on impersonal. And what is being sought is the unmanifested aspect of manifestation. Right. That's the seeking. Right.
Mm.
So that therefore, and you guys have often heard this term, that the seeker himself is the sought. Right. The seeker phenomenally thinks he's trying to find something and says to himself, I'm trying to find something that is like everything else I have tried to find. So an object with no independent existence has deemed that he or she has found things in the past. And now they know something's missing. Typically, that's what moves spiritual folks to make movement. So there's something missing. That's the sense, right? And so they think they need to find something. But then it's seen that what they are is the underneath, right? The underneath piece, awareness itself. That's what they are. So now you can see there's nothing to seek and nothing to find. There's only a revealing, and that revealing dissolves the sense of I've got to find something.
That
Mm.
reminds me of the thing that you said earlier about the seeker, notices that he's the animating consciousness, not that which is being animated.
Correct.
I love that.
Correct. Right. So
Yeah.
so it's a noticing. You see what you're saying? It's a noticing. Well, when you see that what you're seeking is that which has no form, no definition, no particular attributes or particulars, right? Now you understand why is it not this and not that? Because the revealing becomes a function of stripping away all of the buildup of a lifetime, right? To leave the animating consciousness itself. That's what the exercise is about. Right. So so he said, so this is the piece that I think you all if when you get this book or you have it, put this down because this is where I think you can go back to this at any time. It's a beautiful place because what he does is he says, I mean, think about this. I'm going to do this in 7 steps. I'm going to walk you through it, right? Which is you don't find that very often in these, right? So he says, number one, the original state prevails, I am, without any knowledge or conditioning, without attributes, without form or identity. Number one. Number two, for no apparent reason, other than it is its nature to do so, arises the thought or concept I am, the impersonal consciousness on which the world appears as a living dream. Number two, right? Number three, consciousness, in order to manifest itself, needs a form. So it grabs a physical body. He didn't say grabs, I did, with which it identifies itself and thus starts the concept of bondage with an imaginary objectifying I. Whenever one thinks and acts from the standpoint of this self-identification, one could be said to have committed the original sin of turning pure subjectivity, limitless potential, into an object, a limited actuality. Right? That's the that's the original sin. If you ever read that story, if you read the Adam and Eve story, that's the symbolization. No object, number four, no object has an independent existence of its own, and therefore an object cannot awaken itself from the living dream. And yet, and this is the joke, the phantom individual seeks some other object as the absolute or reality or whatever. Right?
Mm.
So you can tell he doesn't have a lot of respect for whatever it's seeking, whatever. Okay. That's number five. No, number four. Number five, if this is clear, one must reverse and go back and find out what one originally was and always has been before consciousness arose. So now that reframes the whole search, right? So
mm,
if you look out at the spiritual world as we know it in the, light it up on Facebook anytime, right? There's always somebody seeking for something, right? Now I know that this kind of comes with bad. This is bad news to the healers because they're out there engaged in healing a body mind that they believe there's some deeper, incredible meaning through that healing, but all they're doing is basically getting the food fixed up so it'll last a few more years before it's finally food, right? That's what healers do, right? Yeah. And teachers are the same thing. We sit and we talk and we throw out a bunch of words and you get to hear a bunch of words, the body mind dies and the words go away. Done. Right. So all of these things that everybody believes is incredibly important that we're all engaging in, right, is based on the mistaken notion of an independent, autonomous, right, decision-making entity, right? That somehow itself has spiritual aspects. It does, right? But the spiritual aspect is that it is all, right? It is absolutely the everything that we believe is is there somewhere, and we're there too, and we somehow coexist with it. We're not doing any coexisting, right? We're just body minds, and it's actually that which animates us, right? We are that. That's the revealing, right? And I mean, you can, um, there's a very famous, it was picked up by, Ramana Maharshi, self-inquiry, and Yogeshwari turned it into a face-to-face. And there are practitioners of that. Joseph's one of them. And you sit across from each other and you ask the question, who am I? Right? And a very prevalent in Osho's ashram when I was there.
Oh yeah.
And what's the point? Well, the point is that in that actual interaction, right, and explaining who am I, that the I actually collapses, and it's seen that the who one is the animating consciousness. It's seen and experienced, to be really clear, right? Number
Yeah.
seven. And so the circle is complete, and the seeker is the sought, right? So that's the whole notion of what this is. All right. So now I want to now this is going to be a little bit of a challenge because I'm going to move into this, and what I'm going to point out is that when you come to satsang, that's a very special device, right? And that it has probably a much deeper possibility than you might have imagined. Because we all come to satsang and normally we're in the sense of thinking that we're the individual and we're coming there in order to participate and do something, right? But is that really true? So this week, if you want a copy of this is up on the website, up on our website, by the way. If you ask for it, I can create. I got a word version of it. So I said, what is satsang as a device, and what is its purpose, and why do we use it? That's the question. Now, note that this question, the answer to that is going to mirror a lot of what we just talked about in terms of what Maharaj had to say. So, over the years, I've been asked many times to explain satsang. Usually, I say it's a device created to create, I use the word twice in a sentence, a slow and a subdued space. Why slow and subdued? Because the volume and velocity of arising manifestation in most circumstances is the glue that keeps the misidentified ego misidentified. Right? So think about it when it gets hot and heavy, right? Volume and velocity, when that appears in manifestation, right? That's when we are most likely to go back to our identity.
mm,
Right? That's when you operate without thinking, right? It's just reactive. Well, that reaction is built on the notion that you're an independent existent entity, and that's the identification. So satsang is a place. And meditation, by the way, is also has this same aspect, which is a device created to slow the volume and velocity in such a way that something more can be seen about the identity of the practitioner, so to speak. Papaji used to tell his seekers, keep quiet and come to satsang. That was it. Keep quiet when not in satsang to establish a slow and subdued space. Why? In this space, the examination and elimination of the illusory being a seeker believes he is can happen. Okay, so that's all good stuff, right? That works. But we're actually talking to each other still, right? We're saying, okay, you as an individual entity are going to go and you're going to be now in this slow and subdued space, and the possibility is to see something more. So what's the deeper version? From the standpoint of Advaita, satsang is not a meeting between persons, nor is it primarily a teaching session, a discussion group, or a spiritual practice. These are only appearances. In truth, satsang is a device, a deliberate circumstance in which consciousness is invited to turn its attention away from its habitual misidentification with the body-mind and towards its own impersonal nature. Right? That's the deeper version. Right? Now, the reason I'm reading this to you is so you can say, when I come to satsang, can I drop below where it is? And I think this group particularly would be good at this. Everybody here is pretty seasoned. Can I drop below that? And can I participate in satsang as the animating consciousness and not the individual I believe myself to be? Right? That's the opportunity. So the reason I wrote this was to say there is an opportunity here, and it's deeper than you might think. You may think you come to satsang to learn something new. Nothing new is added. What occurs is a process of subtraction. The sage does not give you truth. He removes what you are not, which is the activity of consciousness. This is why Nisargadatta Maharaj so often insisted that understanding, not experience, is the key. Experiences come and go. They belong to the body, mind, and therefore cannot be what you are. Satsang is structured to continually frustrate the seeker's tendency to accumulate experiences, insights, and spiritual accomplishments. It functions like a mirror that refuses to reflect the image the ego wants to see. That's what's happening here, right? So if you're in satsang and you're feeling frustrated, and you say, well, wait a minute, who's frustrated? Where's it take you, right? To the I am, to the witness. Oh yeah, I am the animating I got it. Now it's not frustrating, because it's pretty easy to see, I'm kind of a pompous ass when I'm in that other space, right? Or whatever term you want to, that's the one I use for me. So, so as long as you believe I am the one that must attain liberation, satsang appears as an instruction. When that belief weakens, satsang reveals its deconditioning. That's the participation. That's the possibility of participation, right? Is when when it does that. When the belief collapses, it is seen that satsang never happened at all. That's the end, right? From the perspective of the absolute, there was no teacher, no student, no teaching, only consciousness recognizing itself. So what does the room look like when everyone is in the animating consciousness? It looks like that, right? There's no teacher, there's no teaching, there's nothing. From the perspective of the absolute, right? There was no teaching, no student, no student, no teacher, and no teaching. Why then does satsang appear necessary? The purpose of satsang is not transformation. It's clarification. Nothing is transformed because what you are has never been bound, only the misunderstanding removed. Satsang is therefore not about answering questions, it is about dissolving the questioner. Right? So when you come to satsang as the questioner, right, the possibility, understand, is not to get an answer to the question, but rather to dissolve the questioner that you are. Much different way to look at, right? Tuning in, right? If we go more deeply into how satsang functions in consciousness, we must first be clear that nothing is actually happening to consciousness itself. Consciousness does not evolve, awaken, or purify. What we call satsang only operates at the level of misidentification with the apparent structure of the mind. The mechanism is subtle, but it's precise. The sense of individuality is not a solid entity. It is a recurring movement of identification. All right. Now here's what happens. It is by reflex. It is the reflex by which impersonal awareness habitually claims experience. I think, I am, I understand, I am confused, I am progressing. This appropriation happens almost instantaneously. Remember, I talked about volume and velocity. How quick do we identify with who we are when the heat's on, right? And it's rarely examined because it feels natural. So when you're challenged in a satsang with something and you're going, whoa, that can't be it, right? The mind is basically backfilling as fast as it can. We punched a hole in the tire. We got to get that thing patched, right? Otherwise, the ego will be no more, right? The air will leave and the ego will be a flat tire. That's what's going to happen, right? So satsang functions by exposing this in reflex in real time. You can watch it happen in yourself, right? So why does it do that? Because the ego is not an independent entity, even though it classes itself as such. And it believes by instantaneously creating a story that basically is against whatever it is hearing, that it establishes stability. So when you watch your ego run around and fill all the holes in any kind of a conversation that you're having, what is happening is it is basically saving your ego to produce what it would think is stability. When, of course, the ego can have no stability. But nonetheless, that's what the attempt is. There's an intuitive sense that you are awareness, which is permanent peace. And the ego tries to basically acquire that through establishing itself. That's all that's going on, is that intuition feeds through and the ego is trying to fulfill that objectively without understanding that it can't be, right? So a question is asked, an answer is given. Immediately, the mind attempts to position itself in relation to the answer, right? That's what it does. You listen to somebody, and what's the first thing? You can see it happening inside yourself. It's like, boom, here's where I am on that one. First thing that happens, right? Agreement, disagreement, insight, resistance. In that very movement, the sense of separate center reconstitutes itself. See, here's what's happened. The challenge happens, and that center starts to dissolve. And the ego says, hell no, not happening on my watch. And it runs around and comes up with all the reasons why that can't be the case. It reconstitutes itself. The role of the teacher is not merely to provide conceptual clarity, but to eliminate this subtle reappropriation as it happens. Right now, I or any other teacher can speak to that, right? But where's the only place that it can be seen, right? When Papaji said, "Come to satsang," be quiet and come to satsang. Those are the only two things he told these people to do, right? He wanted to build a world in which they could see the misappropriation and the reconstitution as their egos did it, right? Because what happens, right? The reconstitution is a central activity of separation. It happens every day. Someone says something that doesn't resonate, and the mind, like a hawk after a mouse, reconstitutes itself to refute the non-resident and keep the separation in place. Satsang is a place where the reconstitution can be watched and the falsity of its output eliminated. By whom? By consciousness itself. When it is pointed out that even the feeling I am getting closer is just another arising in consciousness, something destabilizes. The presumed observer is seen to be another object, another appearance. The ground shifts, right? The destabilization is not comfortable. That's why the ego runs around and tries to fill the hole. It can feel like groundlessness, the loss of psychological reference points, but that is precisely the functioning of the device. So when that happens, rather than try to be the offsetting weight, which the ego likes to do in order to keep its separation, right? If one knows that this destabilization is part of the process, then one can simply sit in the destabilization, right? That's the challenge. The challenge is to enter satsang as the animating essence and let the destabilization in the ego happen in such a way that that actually becomes what one is and it's seen what one is, right? So the mind is repeatedly brought to a place where it cannot secure itself through understanding, experience, or identity. Every foothold becomes transparent. Over time, or rather through repeated exposure, right, the automatic contraction of identification begins to lose its unquestioned authority. Right? That ego runs around and does all of that stuff because you think that's who you are. So it has entire authority, right? So what happens when one lets this dis-ease, if you will, this sense of unease happen? And then the revealing is, oh wow, what the ego is up to is really not what it is I am, right? Well, that questions the authority of the ego, right? There is a growing recognition that thoughts, reaction, insights, and even resistance are spontaneous movements within awareness, not owned by anyone. Satsang is not implanting a new belief. It is weakening the reflex of ownership. Eventually, the mechanism exhausts itself. The movement of appropriation still arises, right? Here's the thing, you don't get rid of that, right? Because the mind's going to do the mind, right? It absolutely will. And you can see that, sometimes people come into satsang and you watch them for a minute and you go, oh, this is a seeker who has declared the right to do the seeking, right, in the way that they want to do it, right? That they're going to retain that piece. They'll absorb everything else that's said, but they're going to retain the piece to do the seeking the way they say or deem that seeking ought to be done, right? And you kind of know, oh, I got it, right? So it's weakening that reflex of ownership. Eventually, the mechanism exhausts itself. The movement of appropriation still arises because conditioning continues. It's seen as impersonal. It's witnessed, right? The I thought is no longer taken as the center. That's not who I am any longer. So look at that, right? Remember, in the witnessing, I mean, you don't even pay a ticket for this entertainment. You don't pay money for the ticket to this entertainment. It's like, the witnessing is like going to, Barnum and Bailey, right? And so it just becomes another modulation of consciousness. You are just simply the same as everything else that's arising. At that point, satsang has fulfilled its function. The illusion was not destroyed, it was seen through. And what remains is the simple, unadorned fact of being prior to the one who would claim it, right? That's it. So I don't know if you noticed that what we did, right? We did a walkthrough earlier. We see the consciousness. We said, okay, here's the misidentification. Here's the dissolution, the takeaway. We're going to take away the pieces until what's left is animating consciousness only, right? And then we'll see that the seeker is the sought. That's the revelation, right? Satsang is a device that follows that set of steps, right? So yes, it is a device. As an individual, we can say it's a device to slow down, right? The volume and velocity, create a device, slow down the volume and velocity. So as an individual, you can listen to that. But what's the deeper thing? What is it as an animating consciousness? And we went through and essentially a similar set of steps. Now, I didn't put them into steps. I'm not quite as adept as Maharaj to get to that particular place, but that's what's happening there. All right. So those are the two pieces for tonight. Any questions or comments at this juncture?
Alan, I don't have a question. First of all, that was just amazing.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you can expand upon, you talk about there's no relationships, there's only moments.
Correct.
And you also talk about our limited perception, how limited our field of perception is. And I thought that might be apropos with what you just explained. And can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean the I mean, the reason I say that there are no relationships is that, relationship is now don't go, you probably don't want to run home and tell your wife that right away, um, but the reality is that there's just simply moments of arising. And once that's seen, you can see that a relationship in essence is a concept that is attempted to be lived into. Now we know that we're not an independent um, entity anyway. So how do you think that that living into that concept is going to go? Some days it's going to be good, some days not so good because that living is being lived by consciousness itself, right? I always say that humility, right? Humility is not an attribute of an individual, it simply is, right? Because every one of you can look out there and say, well, this is the model of what it is I'm supposed to be, right? And here are the things that are actually happening. And you know what? The things that are happening are falling way short of the model, right? So humility is, nobody's hitting the target here, right? The concepts that are created for the target to hit, you know, um, I'm short-tempered. Well, luckily I have Nisargadatta around and he was short-tempered. So, there's a few examples, but that was that, right? There are things that simply are. Now, in the model of Alan that would be created, my mother probably had a model in it, and I guarantee you I didn't hit a lot of the things that she would have liked. I'm sure she would have liked to see in a pleasant, refined, all of those things. I'm none of those things, right? Instead, she got a man that likes food trucks and short-tempered. That's what you got. So nonetheless, so we all can do that. So humility, you can see, simply is it's not an attribute of an individual. It's simply not the case. Right. So when somebody says to me, gee, you're really humble, I go, well, that's just seeing what is, right? Because every time when somebody tells me how great I am, first thing I'm like, wait, don't go there. You're really, yeah, no, it's really obvious. Listen, I love the aspects that arise, but it's also clear, that we don't get too crazy here. So that's one. And then I think that the limited part, Ron, that you were talking about is just understanding that when one takes manifestation to be who you are, that you immediately limit it to the perception within the body mind itself. So that particular limitation versus, right, the awareness that is the awareness that we all are. Right. So it's often said that the inside is the outside and the outside is the inside. That the infinite, right, the infinity of manifestation cannot compare to the infinity of awareness, right? And that's so typically we look at the inside as the small piece, right? And the outside is the big piece when it's actually the reverse, right? That's what's being said when that comment is made. Hope that does it, Ron.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Don't you sometimes think that the moments of the free samples or the seeing beyond your supposed individuality sometimes come from exhaustion with trying to see it through the ego? Because it's just exhausting, man.
Yeah, and that's what I said in that Satsang piece,
I
right?
know, yeah.
Moment,
It's
yeah,
exhausting.
right.
It breaks it down by repeatedly getting beat up. It'll never work this way, man. What? It'll never work this way, man.
See, if you watch yourself reconstitute your ego, because you can actually see that happen. I mean,
Oh yeah.
you may not see the happening, but you see it. You see the boom, 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 right? Somebody says something and says, "I don't agree with that." Boom, that's already happened. It's already out your mouth before, right? That's that reconstitution. That's that stability that the ego is trying to create. You start to watch that, and after a while, it's tiring because it happens
Yeah.
over and over and over again. Right. I used to say you walk into a restaurant, right? And I love to eavesdrop, by the way, another habit that, it doesn't make me a great person, but nonetheless, restaurants are a great place to eavesdrop. And, at the table next to you is likely this couple, and they've been married for 40 or 50 years, right? And what's the conversation that they're likely to be having? They're basically telling each other who they are because they're always in the effort of recalibrating who it is they are to everybody who is within listening distance. Now, don't you think that wife after 40 or 50 years old knows who the dude is? Like, I'm thinking probably, right? And yet, right, the ego is involved in that reconstitution. Our lifetime is spent mainly in reconstituting,
And,
right?
and,
That's what we mainly do to establish the stability that we think is there. That's not there. Why do we keep doing it? Because guess what? It's not there. If it was there, you wouldn't have to do it every 3 seconds or 2 seconds or whatever it is.
oh yeah.
Right. So that's what you end up doing, right?
Mm.
It's that little story.
It's usually preceded by the words, I'm the kind of person who.
Yeah. Yeah. What you don't know about me is it's like, yeah, yeah, my wife, I don't say stuff like that. If you want to know who I ask her, she's got a better version than I do, I'm sure. That's what we do in life, right? And in a way, think about the tension. The ego lives in tension, right? Because it has to be guarding the gate of its own existence only. It's got to be basically, right? What is it that they do? Basically cruising the perimeter, surveilling the perimeter, or whatever they call that, right? Because it's got to be responsible for all the incoming that might start to dissolve the notion of itself.
Mm.
So the ego has to be on guard to maintain itself. That's exhausting. It's exhausting, right? So when you say that awakening is pure relaxation, that's the relaxation, right? Humility is, okay, fine. Don't let, this body mind doesn't live up to that, all of those standards. See the relaxation that comes, right? Immediately. Oh, cool. Got it. Right. I remember, it was really an amazing thing. I wrote a book some years back called Awakened Leadership. It was kind of a corporate book about leadership on the backbone of non-duality. Now, I wrote in such a way that I don't know that anybody in the corporate world knew that it had a non-dual core, but anybody who is in our world would immediately recognize it, right? Um, and I had contact with a fellow. He taught leadership at Boston College, world renowned, right? And he read my book because I wanted to get a blurb. I was doing let's get a blurb, put it in the book and everything, right? And he called me one day very seriously. He says, Alan, I can't give you a blurb. And I said, why? And he goes, well, he said, in your book, you're very careful to point out that awakening is not a personal attribute. And he says, I can't think of it as anything but.
Mm.
So think about that for a minute, right? So in my book, I had said this is an event that if seen, right, can turn basically a leader into an effortless living in every moment. That leadership becomes effortless activity in every moment, right? And that's awakening. And that has nothing to do with the individual itself. That was how I had put it together in the book. And if you see, he was an older fellow ready to retire. As I said, had a whole complete career that evidently said that can't be the case. It challenged that holding, which was part of his personality. Right. Now, luckily enough, there were several other people that gave me beautiful blurbs, and the book did really well, and it was a wonderful thing, and we had fun with it. But there you see, I mean, that's actual on the ground response to what it is that is the possibility here, not only by your ego but by all egos. They all seem to have the same particular behavior pattern, which is they're involved in pushback in order to pushback and reconstitution in order to maintain their definition for the stability that they believe that they are. That's what their job becomes.
It's also trying to guarantee its continuity, which is very similar.
And that's the thing when I think that's what Ron was after when he says there's no such thing as relationship, right? Relationship requires what? Continuity, right? So when you say there's no such thing as continuity, right? Because the past is in your mind and the future is basically a projection of what's already in your mind. So there's only one moment that anything is happening, and it's right now. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to maintain that a relationship is happening in this moment, right? Without claiming the continuity that the ego would like to have with it. Just like that. All right, guys. Have I talked enough for today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Love the session, Alan. Thanks.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I will see you next week. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. I am, by the way, just to let everybody know, going to be posting one of these pieces like I did on Satsang this week. I'm gonna start to do that every week.
The stuff you wrote at the end that
Yeah,
was yours?
Yeah,
I'd
that
love
was
to see that.
the Satsang stuff was mine.
Perfect. I
So
want to see that, man.
yeah. So anyway, I'll be writing those. I'll be writing one of those every week, and I'll have that in a if people want it in a Word doc or a PDF, we can create that for you. If you guys want to pull those down, just let us know. If when you do see them, if you see that I use the word create twice in a sentence, forgive me for that because I do I do look at it pretty carefully, but at the same time, it's not been edited in a real way. So,
Good. How do I get the PDF of the book?
the PDF, if you'll just send a little note over to the page,
To the
then
page.
then
Okay.
then we'll know because you're going to do it on Facebook, right? So then we
I guess so if I have to.
yeah, well, I know, but that's where we are. I know. But anyway, we can send that back to you in Messenger, or if you give us an email, we can email it to you one way or the
Okay,
other.
good. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that you're talking about that's the pointers book for Nisargadatta. That's
Yeah.
okay, cool. And we do, by the way, Judy, every week we say ahead of time here are the chapters we're going to be doing, so you can actually read those ahead of time if you'd like to. Or you could, like Brad does. Brad comes in. I don't know that he reads them, but he has it ready because he likes to follow in his book. So whatever you want to do, that's what it is.
Okay.
It's a book you can get a hard copy of. It's just we have the PDF and we don't have hard copies of them. So you have to like get them from Amazon or whatever. But you can get it. Because I like to use a hard copy. So
Yeah.
Okay.
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 All right, guys. Much love. I will see you next Thursday. Thanks for coming.